The Fall of the House of Usher was recently released, and throughout the entirety of the 8-episode series, there was one character that was at the center point of it all and was causing terror amongst all of the siblings. This was Verna, a mysterious character that seemed to hold the power of being able to bring death to those who she wanted to claim. With there being a lot of mystery and unanswered questions about the character, I thought I'd break down and explain Verna and shed a bit more light on her. So let's get into it. Here is the Fall of the House of Usher, Verna explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. What was Verna? Well, Verna was the raven in the show, and also from the poem, as was hinted to us by the fact that she had the name Verna, as it's an anagram of the word raven. But what was the raven and its purpose? Well, within this show, Verna mentioned that ravens were considered to be minions of Satan, and with Roderick and Madeline making a deal back on New Year's Eve of 1979 with Verna at a bar, it essentially meant that they made a deal with the devil, hence its deadly consequences, and also it explained why the moment that the both of them walked out of the bar that they believed that they walked into after committing a heinous crime, it just disappeared, because Verna had supernatural abilities which were able to cause her to morph this very world. We saw Verna utilizing these powers on many other occasions in the show too, such as when she turned into a chimpanzee, when she wasn't able to be killed no matter what method would be used against her, and also the fact that she could claim lives at the touch of her finger. The reason we saw the very beginning of this show starting with the funeral of 3 of the Usher children and it cutting to the raven looking down upon Roderick was because it marked the beginning of the end for Roderick, and it made him aware that Verna was the person who was behind all of what was happening to his children, and that his debt was ready to be settled up and paid. Something that he hadn't even thought about or spoken about since the night that he made the deal. This was something that Madeline confirmed, as she said that they never discussed it and they almost viewed it as some kind of fever dream that happened, questioning if it ever really did. Since that day, Verna was most likely off doing what she'd been doing for eternity, being a minion of Satan and making deals with many other people. What Verna did wasn't personal, she was simply collecting payment for the luxurious life that Roderick and Madeline were able to lead, and the consequences that came with it. The fact that Verna was able to cause individuals to die at the touch of her finger has many of us wondering if she was quite literally death, and that's something that she could well be, but it was never confirmed. It was only confirmed that she was the Raven. Even though she's considered to be a minion of Satan, there are morals that Verna has and works with, as she doesn't just go around killing and taking pride in it. For example, all but one of the offsprings of Roderick Usher met a gruesome fate, but not through her own choice, but because she felt as though they needed to pay for the way that they'd behaved with the privilege and wealth that they flaunted around and paraded above everybody, something which they were just merely given. They essentially allowed it to change their own behaviors. This is best represented with the way that Verna claimed Lenore and also her father, Frederick. Verna mentioned herself that originally, Frederick wasn't going to get a difficult, painful death due to the fact that for the most part, he behaved okay and wasn't as entitled as the others. However, when he decided to bring his wife home and he started to play God with her following the injuries that she got, then that meant that he worked his way out of a quick and easy departure, showing that it didn't have to be like that. With Lenore, because she was an individual who wasn't corrupted like the rest of the Ushers and was actually a good soul, we saw that Verna actually had some remorse for the fact that she had to take her as part of the deal that her grandfather made. She told her of the impact that her mother made in the world following her death and the countless amounts of lives that went on to be saved, whilst also saying that it was all because of her and the fact that she saved her. This was before touching her on the head and ending it all in a way that was in complete contrast to her relatives. So it showed that Verna wasn't this evil entity that took joy in killing. However, the deals that she made explicitly meant that she had to do that as a form of payment. The fact that Verna could see that Lenore's mother went on to save many lives shows that Verna can also see into the future too. This makes me think that when Roderick and Madeline made the deal around 50 years ago, she could already see the offspring that they'd have and what was going to be happening in the present day. Verna is an immortal entity that has no real way of being killed, at least not on Earth. We saw her in photos that dated back to the early 1900s, and she hadn't aged a single day. I believe that she is a minion of Satan and could well be death, but the bottom line is she creates deals in order to collect what matters most to certain individuals. Collecting things, like ravens do. She tests their moral values and most of the time shows the worst in people. As we saw with Roderick, he had 2 children at the time of making the deal, but he was still willing to make a deal knowing that their lives would get cut short in order to gain wealth and power. Verna and the Raven's connection to the poem. The character of Verna and the fact that she's a raven actually derives from the poem titled The Raven, which was created by Edgar Allan Poe in 1845. Edgar Allan Poe is an individual whose stories had a heavy inspiration for Mike Flanagan for this entire series, having episodes even centered around some of the short stories which tied into the wider narrative. The raven in the poem is a figure that was focused around a narrator who was visited by a raven in the night as he was slowly growing tired of life due to mourning an individual called Lenore, somebody who he cared deeply about. The raven only uttered one word to the narrator in the entire poem, and this was nevermore. This was the very thing that Roderick received on his phone in the form of text messages from Lenore throughout the entirety of the show, so there was a clear connection there. The narrator in the poem wanted to be reunited with Lenore and couldn't face living on this earth without her. If he were to do something himself, then the belief at the time would be that he wouldn't get into heaven and he'd then be separated forever from Lenore. So it meant that he either had to live out his days with the deep depression that he had, or he had to be killed by something, which one would imagine the Raven could have done, especially considering that we know its powers after watching the show. The final extract of the poem very much seems as though the narrator of the poem was deceased and was no longer around, something which can be quite controversial, as I know there are many interpretations which state that he was alive. But if we take a look, and the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted nevermore. I think this is something which shows that the Raven most likely claimed the narrator at the end, just like how we saw Verna claim every single Usher being that was within the show. Even Roderick, showing the connection between the Raven in the poem and also in the Netflix show. Verna was most definitely an interesting character in the fall of the House of Usher, and despite being an evil entity that wasn't human, there was something that was extremely human about her. She had compassion, conveyed emotion, and even though she was some kind of demon, there was kindness in her eyes when there needed to be, or even when she wanted there to be. The connection to the poem is something that I'm a fan of too. It was a great way to get this character that is so symbolic of depression, darkness, and death to be the very thing that's in the show. So I thought it was a real creative way of doing so. So, there you have it, the fall of the House of Usher, Verna explained. If you want to see more videos such as endings explained, theories and predictions and character breakdowns, then click on the I button. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. Were you a fan of the character Verna? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.